Now that we have completed aperture, we're going to move forward with shutter speed. Shutter speed is also another setting within your camera that can control the light and how well you can capture motion on your camera. There are two things that you want to remember when you are adjusting your shutter, is that shutter adjusts the lighting in your camera as well as how well it captures motion. When you take a button, you will hear a click sound on your camera. That click is the shutter. It's like a door opening and closing. It's the amount of time that you are letting in light and also motion as well. The slower it is, the more motion you are allowing. So for example, somebody is at the elevator and the elevator is closing. However, if it's slowly closing, it will give a person a chance to go in to the elevator. However, if it closes fast, then the person won't even have an opportunity to get in. Likewise with shutter speed. When you are having a slow shutter speed, or if it's slow, a slower setting, you are letting in more motion capabilities. Now, if you have a fast shutter speed, which is faster, it just means that you are not letting in a lot of motion range. So what does that mean? Let's talk in terms of lighting. So in terms of lighting, a quick shutter, like a quick blink, you're not letting in a lot of light. However, if you have a slow blink, you are allowing more light in. How is shutter speed measured? It is measured in fractions of a second. What does that mean? It means 1/100, 1/200, 1/30, etc. And what is considered a slow shutter speed? Well, think of it in math terms. When you divide, what is bigger, 1/30 or 1/100? So 1/30 would let in more light and would let in more motion, while 1/100 would be a lot faster, which would let in less light and less motion. Let's say, for example, 1/1000 is very fast, 1/250 is a medium pace, and 1/30 is slow. So what I want you to remember is the faster the shutter speed, the less light. However, it freezes the motion. Now, if you are having slower shutter speed, you are letting in more light, but it is going to cause more motion blur. So what I want you to do is I want you to identify where the shutter is on your camera. You're going to locate the shutter speed by looking for the fractions of the second, not the f-stop, but fraction of the second. You're going to locate where it is. And I want you to identify the lowest and highest shutter speed on your camera. Now that you have identified the settings on your camera, I do want you to take note of what exactly that means. And then you can use that video first and then explain that. Now that you understand what it means, we are going to try another activity, which is shutter speed with the camera simulator. There are two settings that you can do when you are taking your photos. You can do shutter priority and a manual setting. Where can you find the shutter priority? So aperture priority was AV and shutter priority is known as TV. TV is when you only focus on adjusting your shutter speed while the camera figures out the setting for the aperture and the ISO. That is what you need to remember. Why do you only want to focus on the shutter speed? Well, sometimes when you are capturing an event and you don't have time to really focus on the lighting and you want to make sure that your lighting is balanced, you might want to use shutter priority because it only focuses on the quality that you're trying to achieve. And the quality that you're trying to achieve in this instance is how controlled the motion is going to look. If I want to take a photo of a ballerina jumping mid-air, you would like to have a faster shutter speed. And then if I want to capture something in full motion, like a car racing by, and you want to capture the streaks of motion, you might want to utilize a lower shutter speed, a slower shutter speed. So what I want you to do is I want you to use the camera simulator and you're going to try shutter priority. There are two things that I want you to take note of when you adjust the shutter priority settings. Set your shutter speed to a fast shutter of 1/2000 and I want you to observe what happens. How does it affect the brightness and how does it affect the motion in the image? Then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to set your shutter to a slow shutter, which is 1/30. And I want you to observe what happens to the brightness and the motion in the image. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to shoot manual. When you're shooting manual, remember that you have the ability to adjust all three settings. You're going to set your shutter speed to a fast shutter of 1/2000, and I want you to take note of what happens to the overall exposure, which is the lighting, and the quality of the image. Then the same thing for the shutter speed with a slow shutter setting of 1/30. I want you to observe what happens and how does it affect the overall exposure and overall image. Now that you were able to adjust the settings in the camera simulator, I want you to remember shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second. If you are trying to adjust the settings of your shutter speed, 1/30 is considered slow and 1/4000 could be considered fast. So what happens if you are taking a photo using slow shutter speed settings? That means you are letting in more light, however, you are capturing more motion. Now, if you are using a setting on shutter speed of 1/4000, you are letting in less light, but you are only capturing something frozen or completely standstill. So just remember that when you are adjusting your shutter speed settings, and we will move on to the next thing. And the last setting of the exposure triangle that we are going to learn about is ISO. ISO actually stands for International Standards Organization. Doesn't really matter, but it's just so that you know that. However, what I want you to remember when you are thinking about the ISO is like a built-in flashlight within your camera. So if your aperture is the window, your shutter is the door, the ISO is the light in the house. So for example, if your window is not letting in a lot of light, your door also shut too fast, then you have the ISO to adjust. I usually like adjusting the ISO first or last to set the tone of the room. Let's say, for example, there is no real light in the setting. Your ISO can actually force more light in so that your camera can capture the photo in the best light possible. So in simple terms, ISO helps brighten a photo within your camera, especially if you do not have natural light. So how does ISO work? ISO is measured in hundreds or numbers. Usually the lowest ISO that you can get is 100, and then you can get all the way up now to 1600, 2000, depending on the type of camera you have. A good way to think about ISO is like it is a dimmer switch. When it's bright, you keep it low, and when it's dark, you turn it up. One thing that I do want you to remember before you move on is that when you are adjusting your ISO, you have to remember that the high ISO might equal more brightness. However, there are consequences when you are using a camera with a higher ISO, which means that it will make your photo grainy, like noise or static on the actual photo. It's going to look like they're a bit of dots because it's forcing that light in. What I want you to do is I want you to be able to identify now where your ISO is. So you've identified your aperture, shutter speed, and now I want you to identify your ISO. Remember, the ISO can be in hundreds. Again, I want you to identify the lowest ISO on your camera as well as the ISO. And I'm going to let you do that, and we're going to continue after you have done so. So now that you have identified the ISO settings on your camera, I want you to remember what that means. A low ISO means that it is more sensitive to light, which means that you're not forcing a lot of light in. It's best to use under sunny conditions, outdoors on a sunny day. With a low ISO, it produces clearer, sharper images with less noise. The higher you go, the more noise there's going to be, especially if you have one of the older cameras. So a high ISO could mean 800 to 3200 or more, but it's also the sensitivity to light. It's best used under low light conditions, and then also it can make your image brighter, but may introduce some noise or static. When would you adjust ISO? When you have a bright scenario, you might want to keep your ISO low, but if ever you're in the dark and you're taking a photo of an event that is a night event, you might want to increase your ISO. So that concludes the 3 exposure settings of your camera. I hope you have understood how to utilize these settings. After this, the next part of the video, we are going to talk about how to utilize all 3 settings together to help you create the best photo possible.